Hi, everyone. Welcome to Byte, a podcast for gamers by gamers about politics and sometimes about magic.
Yeah, Magic the Gathering is a game that
No,
Callum and I
no,
both
no, no,
know.
no, no, not Magic the Gathering. Other magic. Magic in video games. Today on Byte, we're going to be talking about what is the ideal magic system. The sort of platonic ideal magic system for a video game. Now, before we get into this, I think we should define what we're looking for, basically. So, Emilio, would you mind defining for us what our ideal magic system is?
Yeah, sure. So specifically because video games are an interactive medium, I think that the two things for our magic system that we really have to look for is, firstly, how does the magic system enhance or detract from player agency? How does the magic of the world allow a player to do things? That's very important because games are fundamentally interactive media. Therefore, agency is a core component of the magic system of video games. The other thing that we look for is, of course, the narrative and maybe lore integration with the magic system. That's something that Callum and I both have issues with, especially in games like JRPGs. So that's how we're going to be looking at trying to establish, like, what does a magic system do for a game? How well does it integrate with the lore of that game? And maybe a secret third thing. We
Yeah,
don't know
a
yet.
secret third option that we haven't yet discovered. We discover it along with us.
Yeah, listen to this podcast in New Game Plus. You'll be able to get the third unlocked ending. So, Callum, I think it's important to maybe give our viewers a little bit of the genesis. What was on your mind when you wanted to talk about this topic?
Well, I was playing, I think, Baldur's Gate 3, which is a game obviously made by Larian Studios, who previously worked on Divinity
Mm-hmm.
Original Sin 2, which has one of my favorite magic systems. And I think I switched to a different game. I can't remember exactly which one. And I just thought to myself, wow, magic feels so different in this and not good. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel good to do. And I thought about all of the games that I've played where I've avoided using magic because it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't have enough agency. It ends up feeling like a kind of vestigial part of the game. So I wanted to talk about also, with writing and everything. I'm always writing about wizards, basically. So
Yeah.
magic
Yeah, buy
systems is one
Callum's
of the
book,
few things
guys.
that I can. Please buy my book. I need to eat. That magic systems is one of the few things I think I can rarely talk about. And
So,
yeah,
no, that's really interesting because I think that one of the things that has become very prolific in modern fantasy is the idea even of a magic system, right? I'm not sure, how many people have really read the Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien doesn't have really a magic system, right? Magic happens sometimes. I don't even think Gandalf can really be said to cast any spells, right?
yeah.
But nowadays, you need to know about your magic system. If you don't have a comprehensive explanation about how your magic system works, Brennan Lee Mulligan will complain about you
We'll
in a
break
clip
into
on.
your house and steal all of your capitalism. Um,
No, it's
also,
interesting.
I think it's interesting because like we've made a shift in fantasy away from wizards being the villain or being the advisor. Previously I think wizards were either the people who sent you on the quest, who gave you the advice, who were the Gandalf figure or the Merlin figure, who were there to like guide you but not be the main
The actual
character.
hero,
Yeah,
yeah.
or they were the villain. They were Ming the Merciless, right? They were Skeletor. The magic was meant to be the great obstacle, not something that you actually thought about and discussed. So magic could feasibly do anything.
Yeah, like how many times in a Disney story is the bad guy of that story a woman who can do magic? I mean, sure.
A lot of times.
Yeah. I think it says something about the Disney Corporation's assessment of women, but like how many times is the villain of the story somebody who can do magic, and the hero of the story is like a
Someone
somebody
who
whose magic
can't.
is yeah, well, someone whose magic is maybe more innate. Like Snow White isn't casting spells; she just sings well.
I don't know that that's
And
magic necessarily, although I do love the idea that it is. But I get you. Like usually the hero's magic, especially in Disney, is a lot more defined than the villain's magic is. The villain just seems to have like general magic, whereas
Mhm.
like the hero will have a specific kind of magic,
I think
like
that's
genie
interesting
wishes.
because yeah, no, I think that's interesting because as gamers, right, we are fundamentally keyed in to concepts that are not actually important for a movie, right? Like a story, yeah, sure, it's maybe interesting if the world of your magic movie can explain how the magic works, but that's not necessarily what people are engaging with. They're engaging with the story. But if you're playing a game and the game says, "Hey, listen, you need to press these buttons to cast the spell," you have to know how to do that. And if you don't know how to do that, you can completely not engage with a part of the system.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think the interesting thing is that games have a lot more time to explain this stuff to you. Like that's always the biggest drawback of having a hard magic system in a book or a movie especially, or a TV show, because you don't have that much time to explain all the rules. But a video game has a ton of time and is expected to explain all the rules, so it doesn't like necessarily break flow for them to tutorialize you on how magic works.
No, that's a great point because I think that especially if we're going to relate it to the concept of player agency, right? The agency of the wizard in this particular video game is directly related to the ability of the player to do those things.
Oh
If you
yeah.
don't know how to do the moves, well, you're not a very good wizard, and you're not going to pass your wizarding exams, and you're going to have to pay back your wizard student loans by taking a job at the Shrek version of McDonald's or
I'm pretty sure
whatever.
Shrek had a version of McDonald's, but
No, no, for sure he did.
I think it's the other thing is like it's the romantic ideal of a wizard, right? Is someone everyone has a different like picturesque view of what a wizard is, and to me a wizard has always been someone who can solve everything by blowing everything up but doesn't
Mm.
have to. Like they have a lot of options. Like to me a wizard has always been someone who can essentially be a Swiss army knife for any situation because that's what magic is. Magic is
Yeah, I
literally
mean,
narrative convenience.
yeah, I mean, it goes back to the days of like my experiences playing Dungeons and Dragons, where oftentimes a high level wizard really can get a party out of pretty much everything because they just have a spell that can do whatever it needs to do at that particular moment.
Who among
But
us, who among us has not built a wizard in D&D and then looked at the spell Featherfall and thought to themselves, but what if we fall off a cliff? That's what like player agency means to me, is that you are able to handle a situation that's not necessarily combat. I think that's the important part, is that magic shouldn't just exist in combat. And that's kind of the problem I have with like JRPGs, like Final Fantasy and stuff, is that because combat is it takes place in a different dimension, basically.
yeah, yeah,
There's a
you
little
teleport to the Shadow Realm.
yeah, kind of. You go and then you're in like a arena, and then you do turn-based combat, like Final Fantasy VII or whatever. Did you Cloud Strife in Final Fantasy VII can just do magic? He's like a mercenary with a big sword, and he can also summon lightning. And it's like this guy gets captured, right? I haven't finished Final Fantasy VII, but feasibly, Cloud Strife can be captured and put in prison.
Yeah, conceptually, right?
And he wouldn't
But
be able
then,
to do anything about that unless the game gave you like a key you can steal or a puzzle to solve. But I can summon lightning and shoot fire. Why can this prison hold me? That's, I think, where player agency doesn't manifest itself very well. And also, if your magic system is almost purely about like damage, like doing damage, then that kind of it feels like it takes away from the most interesting parts of magic, which is the
so
versatility.
yeah, so one of the things that I'm going to quote you as saying is that magic should not be like a bow or a gun. You shouldn't be just equipping various types of damage ability because at that point you are just making a first person shooter or whatever kind of action game you're making, except the action is just done with spells, right? Like if you remember some of the earliest attempts at making dungeon crawlers, right? Some of the first 3D dungeon crawlers. The games that are either contemporaneous or predate Doom, you're looking at games that are like Magic. You're just shooting fireballs from your hand. You're just shooting fireballs from your hand in first person, and that's what Magic is. But how crazy would it be to actually throw a fireball? Right? You can never use the fireballs to do anything, other than throw fireballs at enemies to kill them, and that's interesting because
maybe that's the secret third thing for a good magic system is that the magic needs to actually feel like weighty. And not to go back on the point, but to take something from like first person shooters and stuff, there's nothing more disappointing than when you shoot a gun in a shooting game and it doesn't have any like kick to it.
It feels like you're shooting like a toy gun.
Yeah.
Right?
But if a gun has like an appropriate like sound design and everything that makes it sound like you're properly doing some damage, it pulls you into the experience like nothing else. Holding a fireball in my hand, even as pedestrian as that is by Magic standards, should feel amazing. It should like crackle and swirl and everything. Like I feel like Magic in games these days gets a lot right in the visual department because it's all particle effects and modern games can do that so well. But I think like sound design, like having the explosion really feel like it's affecting things. Having the magic feel like, and I guess that's another thing, is that the magic needs to feel like it's affecting the world as well as just you.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you think about a lot of idle animations, right? If I'm holding a fireball in my hand, am I just going to hold it there in the hand statically, like maybe I would a gun? Or am I going to be moving my hand and moving the fire, and maybe sometimes my hand is a bit too close to the fireball and, a finger, goes out, or I break my concentration or something like that? It is important because it is a part of immersion. But, the thing about player agency is that people play games to do things, right? You can't have a game really where nothing happens because at that point it's a movie. Yes, it could be made in a game engine, but at that point you're watching a movie.
I mean, try not to destroy Hideo Kojima's entire business model. I'm kidding. Kojima fans, don't come at me for this.
No, I mean, Kojima gives you stuff to do. It doesn't always make sense, but like
he gives you a jigsaw puzzle. It's just like there's dragons in the background. He's like, solve this.
No, I mean, it's like, imagine if somebody put like 3 TV screens, and on one screen was playing like Die Hard or something like Escape from New York, and on the other screen you're listening to like Buddhist philosophy, and on the third screen, somebody's playing like Devil May Cry. And then Kojima walks in and gives you a jigsaw puzzle, insists that, you have to watch the screens, but also do the puzzle. And then every so often the TVs will change, right?
That's a good metaphor.
I want to ask you, when was the first time you ever played a game where you felt like the magic system was actually maybe really realized, where it felt like, oh, I'm not just using a gun that's shaped like a fireball. I'm actually playing something that lets me do magic in a more maybe immersive kind of way.
I suppose now here's the problem with questions like that is that I don't remember every game I've played.
Well, I have an answer for that.
I've been doing this for a long time.
Draw a cigarette,
I suppose the best example I can think of for it is Divinity Original Sin 2. It felt like there were... you know what? Here's a good example of why I say this. In Divinity Original Sin 2, you can kill every person you come across. Every single one. Regardless of whether or not they're a quest giver. And the way they compensate for that is that if you have
you can do necromancy.
Well, that. But also, if you have a spell that lets you talk to animals, the animals will give you the quests.
That's really clever.
Yeah, and occasionally the animals will give you different quests and things like that. And
right, because they're animals.
Yeah, and the magic system is interesting because you're something called a sorcerer, so you like cast spells using power from the source of magic or something. I don't remember exactly.
Oh, so that's where the word sorcerer comes from. It's the source of magic.
Yeah, it's not SOR, it's SOUR. It's literally
right.
Sorcerer. but you in the first act of the game you get like these collars put on you that stop you from doing that. And it's great because later on when you get the collars removed eventually and you can walk
It's like a huge power
over.
bump.
Well, here's the thing, like you get sorcery points basically by walking over like source, like it's just apparent in the world. And
Right.
when you get those points, you can do the most powerful spells. The most powerful spells require those points. So it does genuinely feel like you've been pushed a step above everyone else. And it's like that for all the classes, but I felt like Magic was really the best one, especially with the way it interacted with the environment. If you, for instance, used Earth Magic a lot, it would often, because Divinity Original Sin 2 is an isometric tile-based game, very much like Baldur's Gate 3, if you used Earth Magic a lot, you had the opportunity to create like oil tiles, like tar and stuff like that, and that would make it harder for people to move through those tiles. But if you used fire magic on it, obviously it created a huge explosion and turned them into fire tiles, which meant that if enemies walked through those, they would take damage. But it also had spells that like aided you in conversation, gave you new movement abilities, and things like that. And I think that that's maybe the most important part of wizardry, is that you can use it in a bunch of different situations.
Yeah, because I mean, like, again, a lot of this I feel comes back to D&D, because the core strength of something like a tabletop game is that you aren't confined by the mechanics of a game engine. You can just say to the DM, hey, can I use a spell in this way? And the DM will think, okay, well, maybe, right? Let's have a conversation about
cool.
it. No, that is
like
that is
tabletop RPGs have the rule of cool because they can, because it's all theater of the mind.
exactly, because you can have a dialogue with the dungeon master and say, listen, I have this spell that allows me to cast a fireball, but what if I didn't cast it at full strength and instead used it like a lamp? Could I do that? And then the DM can say, okay, well, that sounds plausible. I imagine that a high-level wizard such as yourself could do that.
Yeah,
but then
they would like argue like, okay, but then this has to happen. Like maybe you have to roll concentration, and if you don't, you lose control of it.
Or, if you fail a throw or something like that, then the fireball spell will just detonate in your hand, right?
Yeah, but there's doing that in a game would be so much
no, you
work.
can't.
And
you can't really do that. So because you can't do that, but what you're trying to capture is you really just need to think about ways that players might want to use their magic and try and preempt them, right? You might think, oh, well, if a player has this ability that can create ice and he comes to a river and he can't cross the river because he can't swim, maybe he could create ice, across the river, make like a little path for himself. Because I've had moments...
Sorry, there's a section in Magicka, which is like a dedicated wizard game where you literally have to freeze the river to make like an ice pathway that you can cross, and you just sort of threw me back into that memory.
I mean, I feel like it's a trope in video games, right? Like you use ice to cross rivers. I feel like that's something I've played in so many games that, and even I think it was in the Arkham games, even in the Batman Arkham games, you have to make a temporary ice platform to navigate around a flooded room. And I thought to myself, wait a minute,
Batman can swim.
Yeah, well, there's a shark in the water, right? Genuinely, one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever had in a video game is being on a tiny little ice platform while I know that there's a giant shark in this room with me.
And you don't have your bat shark repellent.
I don't, unfortunately not. It's the 2000s, right? The economy, there's no bat repellent anymore. But,
I took a sip of, I thought I could take a sip of coffee. And you brought up the 2000s economy in regards to bat shark repellent. How dare you?
Well, it's the roaring 20s, right? Time is a flat loop.
It's the screaming 20s.
Yeah.
It's the shrieking 20s, the wailing 20s.
Now, the wailing 20s sounds like a thing that you would like hear about in like Ireland, like it'd be a myth.
Or it's the this is when whale oil becomes so much more prevalent.
Yeah. Speaking of Dishonored, I think that in some sense, I don't play a lot of games that are RPGs. I actually don't play a lot of games with magic, which is, I think, probably something that the viewers would find weird about me, especially considering the kind of person that I am. I like to get in there with my swords and beat people up. And I think a game that really highlighted agency for me is actually the original Dishonored game, because I played it, all the Dishoneds really, because I played them in a while, and I thought, oh, I'm doing quite well. And then I look at somebody who can speedrun, and I think, I have no idea how to use this magic system.
I'm all thumbs, apparently.
I have no idea actually how to use magic, And that for me really emphasized, like, actually, yeah, Dowd is a high level wizard, I guess, if you want to say it that way. He knows how to use the magic of his world. And looking at a speedrunner use the systems of the game to do that just made me realize, oh, actually, there is a lot of player agency. I was just bad at the game.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, Dishonored has given you the opportunity to get into a room so that you can discover a secret, right? But to do that, they will either give you maybe a couple of doors that you can lockpick. Maybe you can crawl into the skylight or something. Or you can use the magic system to turn into a rat, like possess a rat and go through the ventilation and get into the room that way. And I think
you can freeze time at the right moment when all the guards are looking away and just walk past them.
Or you can blink into an open window. And I think that like you said, it's perfect agency in that it gives you... Sure, you're not going to be unlocking any doors with any spells. There's no conversation options in Dishonored that you can win in your favor by casting friendship or whatever. But for what it gives you, I think that there's so much player agency. And the other thing is that the magic in Dishonored is incredibly lore relevant.
Yeah,
it is,
I mean,
literally, it's the most lore relevant it can be.
It's interesting when you talk about magic systems and lore, right? Because I brought this up earlier, and that is a lot of other media, especially movies. I think you can have magic in your movie, and for the most part, you can get away with a lot of nonsense because it's a movie, and you've only got 2 hours. And if you stop to explain this, well, the movie's never good. And also to some extent with books as well. George R. R. Martin is famously kind of vague about how his magic system really works. I know nowadays, maybe you've got more people in the Brandon Sanderson kind of camp where they give you a detailed explanation of magic. But at the end of the day, magic is not a real thing. It's a literary device. So, it just works in the way that it needs to for the story. But the problem with video games is that you are playing a thing. You are inhabiting a character in a world with such a degree of, interactivity that if the magic system doesn't interface with the lore of the world or the story,
it makes you feel like an alien.
It's really weird, right?
Imagine you're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, if you are the only person who can cast lightning bolt, that's really weird that nobody else looks around and goes, wait a minute, he could like in JRPGs, this is an older trope in a lot of JRPGs, a lot of the Final Fantasy. It's like, oh, they're just summoning Shiva.
Yeah.
What?
Mr.
Why?
Jenkins, Mr. Jenkins, why is the sky turned black? Oh, the hero's summoning Bahamut again.
Yeah.
Bahamut, sorry.
And nobody just remarks oh, you summoned the world-ending deity, and you use that to kill a Karibo or whatever.
Yeah, you summoned a dragon that can cast a spell that's literally only 3 Square Enix characters can cast, including Donald Duck. Can cast a spell that can cause the apocalypse. It's literally... So, Final Fantasy XIV, let me just say, before Rebirth, which is kind of like the reboot of Final Fantasy XIV, there was a cataclysm in between the two versions. Because the original Final Fantasy XIV ends with, I believe, Bahamut casting this spell that Donald Duck can cast. That causes an apocalypse that destroys the world, and then he gets sealed in the moon. And it's like the most powerful spell that exists. And this random dude with stupid hair can summon a dragon that can do that.
Yeah. It's really
it's
describing it as a...
You're right. It's
describing it as an alien is really I think the best example, the best description of it, because you really are an alien, right? Nobody if you're a Witcher, people in the world of The Witcher think that is weird, right? People will ostracize you. People will look at you as if something is wrong with you. You're the player character. You're meant to be this crazy, awesome, badass, mutant sword fighter, whatever, right? But the people of the world don't see it that way. They have a different perspective from you because they are actually different people.
Yeah,
right?
they're
to
in
their
the
perspective,
world. They have to live
Exactly.
here with this dude. I get to turn the game off and not deal with Gerald.
Yeah. But they have to deal with, this entire situation. Magic. I guess the other thing that we maybe forgot to not to think about is sort of like the perspective of Magic to people who aren't the hero, right? Like one of the other things about Magic in video games is that almost always you are playing as a magical character who is central to the story in some way, shape, or form. But you don't very, very rarely will you find a video game where you are a completely incidental character in a world where magic exists, but you can't do it, right? And
Yeah,
because
also it's just like I think there's a big difference between something like Dragon Age, where people discriminate against mages, and something like The Witcher, where people like are afraid of you. Because first of all, discrimination against mages has never made sense to me in any video game. Because they're wizards. They're mages, You can call them idiots. Like, if you call a wizard a moron to his face and you walk away from that interaction with everything intact, you were lucky. Who the hell would go around being, like, racist to wizards? They can destroy you.
Well, I think the implication, in Dragon Age at least, is that demons and stuff it's like the Warhammer thing, right? Where magic is very, very dangerous to people who can do it. So yes, they can turn you inside out, but they can also turn themselves inside out.
Very true, but then why do the street gangs in like Dragon Age 2 keep attacking you? Because
listen,
if you displayed... If I was to like try and mug someone and they displayed to me that they had the ability to summon hellfire, I'd just leave.
You just... Well, I mean, it's the same as like why in Fallout is a raider guy with a busted golf club attacking a guy in power armor with a plasma rifle. Some of the conventions of video games have to be there in order for the game to exist. For this guy to be an enemy in the game world, I think it's like one of those conceits. But
yeah, I do actually think though that like Dragon Age has very good magical lore.
No, absolutely.
I like the idea of like demons could potentially possess you if you aren't careful enough.
I mean, the fact that like the game plays out completely differently in the opening part if you're a mage is super interesting to me. The fact that you will be treated differently if you are a mage than if you're not a mage. That is an attention to detail that you might not necessarily see in some other games, like in Skyrim, right?
Yeah, if you're a mage, it doesn't matter because you're also the captain of the Thieves Guild and
you're also the head of the Fighters Guild.
Yeah, and like you're a vampire. You're a werewolf, vampire, dragon son, and it's just like being a mage is just your latest hat. And that's I think that's the problem. Being a mage shouldn't feel like you're just wearing a dumb hat.
No, absolutely. I remember feeling incredibly disappointed, especially with the mages, because the Mages Guild in Skyrim, usually that's in any Elder Scrolls game, is really an opportunity to do interesting things, right? To have unusual situations that can only be solved by all the spells that you can do. And yet, despite that fact, I felt very disappointed with the way that the Mages Guild storyline went, to bring about narrative, because it never felt like... It felt like you were a freelance contractor or something.
Yeah.
That you were hired to, like, fix the pipes.
It doesn't matter how many times they call you a student, they never treat you like one. They treat you like a passerby handyman who's like, oh, well, we've got this colt that needs, and you're just like, Greg. I've got just the thing for that. And it's a series of missions where, like you said, you don't even need magic to solve. You don't need like the only time I can remember the College of Winterhold requiring me to actually know magic is at the beginning, where you have to do a certain spell to get in entrance. But beyond
here's the thing. Some viewers at home might object, but you just talked about Dishonored as having a good magic system. But you can solve a lot of the problems in Dishonored without using magic at all. In fact, I famously played Dishonored 2 without using magic at all. But here's the thing, viewers. in Dishonored, the game is explicitly stating, listen, we're going to give you all of these toolboxes. Here is this place. The goal of the game is to give you a puzzle with many different solutions, right? But every option that you choose to use is well fleshed out. If you don't want to use magic, here are gadgets. You need to rely on your sense of speed and timing and stuff like that. If you do want to use magic, great. You can use it and solve these kinds of things. But if I join a college, if I'm paying wizard
if I go
tuition
to
fees,
magic school,
I
I
expect
feel
to
that
actually do magic.
it feels like a requirement for passing my exams is doing magic.
Yeah, it's just
But that's always been the problem
yeah.
with Skyrim, is player
Well, that's the
agency kind
problem.
of goes out. And the issue is that people make the argument of like, oh, but you can solve it any way you want. You can play the game any way you want. And it's like, but you realize that to do that, it means that your actions can't have that big an effect on the world.
Yeah,
Because it would
flattens
be-
the experience.
It would be
Like
so
quite a-
difficult to program a game that can react appropriately to anything you do. So they need to have like a blanket reaction, which is
No,
often what they do.
Yeah,
So it doesn't matter.
no, for sure. It's just a flattening of the experience, right? Dishonored is a very tightly contained level-based experience, and in that level, you have complete free reign. So the game can focus on doing, that kind of thing, but you
Yes.
don't have to worry about, other kinds of things. It's not an open world game. In fact, I don't think, Dishonored should be an open world game. I think it would be worse if it was an open world game because level design is important, right? There's
Yeah, I
no
think
such
there's
thing
a-
really as level design in Skyrim. There's just places that you go and map markers that you follow, right?
I was talking to my dad about this. Is that it's weird that we used to, in conversations, talk about what our favorite level in a game was, and now it's just what's your favorite place.
Yeah.
But because anyway, but first of all, I would say that yes, Dishonored is not open world; it is open ended, and that's a different thing. And second of all, I think it's important for us though, in the vein of this conversation and the people complaining, to talk about maybe games that fall outside of this definition, because for instance, in a game like any of the Soulsborne games, right, which are an incredibly combat-oriented experience, I don't know how much player agency you can actually give to the player. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, right, but in any of the later Soulsborne games, did they ever give you anything that was equivalent to the Master Key that they gave you in Dark Souls 1?
I don't think so, but then again,
Because that sequence broke.
yeah,
Basically,
because you
like,
can unlock unlock that one gate and bypass like a part of the early game, I think.
in my very first playthrough, or not playthrough, in my very first time playing Dark Souls, I didn't know the depths existed because I took the Master Key because it made so much sense to
You just
do
take
that.
the key.
Yeah, so why wouldn't you take a key that can open like a bunch of doors? And I immediately went to like Blight Town, and I had no idea that the
Ooh,
depths even
ouch.
existed. Yeah, and that's the rough thing, is that because of sequence breaking like that, you get players who will get into a situation they are not prepared for, and then they'll be like me and stop playing the game for like years.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about Dark Souls, and also before I say that, I mean, like viewers at home, if you're playing Byte Marx Bingo, I mean, we've talked about Dishonored, we're talking about Dark Souls. Callum has brought up Divinity 2 Original Sin. Like, those of you who are playing the Byte Marx Bingo at home, we're getting close to getting a bingo. But the thing about, the Souls games in general is that because the way that they're designed, these large open-ended spaces that players can move through, the game designers actually don't necessarily know exactly where the player is going to be, except for very specific sets of like limited places. Like they know you're going to start in the asylum, and they have control over how you go there. But after you get through that, realistically, a good enough player with the worst equipment possible can try to go through any kind of place, and that's very hard to design for because
Which
you don't
is-
know.
Ultimately, that's why they make the impossible doors, the doors that don't open from the side or are locked or whatever.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's some attempt to curtail the player because true freedom, I think, would be unsatisfying.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I think people place value in the you can go anywhere in any order part of games too much. I think the sense of progression that you get from doing things that you're essentially supposed to be doing in a specific order can feel a lot better than just randomly stumbling onto an area and maybe having fun. The surprise of finding a new area is a lot shorter lived than the feeling of achievement you get from beating the boss of the area you were stuck on.
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to the way that their level design works. But I think for me, I prefer to have my progression story based rather than level based.
Well,
I couldn't tell you the exact. I've played the original Half-Life many, many times, but I couldn't tell you exactly the levels. But I can tell you the story, right? I can tell you pretty much an outline of the entire story of the first Half-Life. I couldn't like, oh, this is that level, that's that level. But I can give you the general story because things progress mechanically into the narrative.
yeah.
And that I think is important.
To turn back to magic systems for a second,
Yeah.
I think that the Soulsborne magic system kind of falls out of the, like we said, because there's a limited amount of agency you can give to your player. But even then, if we look at like Dark Souls 1, some of the spells, I don't think the like versatility spells are very good. Sure, you have miracles and pyromancies and stuff, and I'll get into those in a second, but let me just rap about sorceries. In the sorcery sphere, right, the three that come to mind when I think of like player agency versatility spells are Fall Control, Remedy, and Light. And I know that people might be saying that I'm cherry picking and stuff like that. Fair enough, if you know of a spell that really actually genuinely helped you that you cast outside of combat, please let us know in the comments. But one, Light, completely pointless. And here's why. Dark Souls, how the magic system works is that it had a limited number of casts for each spell, right? They hadn't introduced mana or FP or whatever yet, so each spell had a limited number of casts. You also had a limited number of attunement slots, so you could only take so many spells with you. But one of the ways you could circumvent the amount of casts that you had is by putting 2 copies of the same spell into your attunement slots. So instead of having 30 soul arrows, you had 60. If you're a magic-focused character, that is vital. It is vital to do something like that. In Dark Souls 1, there is no item to regain spells like there is in Dark Souls 2. So you have to have as many spells in those attunement slots as possible. And wasting...
and you have to pick the most useful.
Exactly.
Because you...
Wasting a spell slot on Light when you have torches or the Skull Lantern or the Sunlight Maggot or whatever is pointless. Wasting it on Remedy when you have the purple moss clumps and things like that, or the red moss clumps or whatever, is pointless. Wasting it on Fall Control when Fall Control is something that you need to plan out is also kind of pointless. For the most, like, Fall Control is supposed to reduce your fall damage, but most of the time the falls that you're worried about are the instant death ones. It's not the ones where you might die because it's a bit too high. It's the ones like the what is it, the buttresses? Are they buttresses at Anolondo with the archers?
Buttresses. Oh yeah, the cathedral connecting points, right? With the yeah. So you can get hit by an arrow and get. I can't tell you how many times I died there, just because it just hit me with an arrow and then I'd fall off, and there's nothing you can do about that because you die.
Exactly. It's stuff like that, like the point where there's no ground beneath you. So casting Fall Control would be pointless. And then you get like miracles, right? Miracles obviously have heal spells in it, which are honestly very good, but are ultimately just more charges of your healing potion.
Yeah, of the Estus.
Then what else is there? Homeward, I think, is one of the most useful miracles because it's a reusable homeward bone, which is fantastic. But then you get stuff like guidance, which is absolutely pointless. I don't think I know anyone who's ever used guidance because it just makes more messages appear, and the messages aren't necessarily helpful. It's up to the player base.
I think it's interesting to talk about Dark Souls because in some ways it's outside a lot of our conventional definitions because yeah, there is a magic system, but you could play the entirety of the game and not understand what the difference is between a miracle, a sorcery, and pyromancy.
Oh,
you know,
absolutely. Or
the game is that
you could pick up a spell that seems useful, but you don't understand why it isn't. Like I play pyromancy characters a lot because it's really easy to get into, and flash sweat always seemed like such a useful spell to me because it gives you like amazing fire resistance, and in the demon ruins that's so useful.
lots of fire enemies, yeah.
Yeah, except flash sweat is pointless because it doesn't last long enough to be useful in a fight, and it has like one charge. So you can cast it at the beginning of the fight, and then by the time you're inside, you have like 10 seconds of fire protection.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that in a lore perspective, it's very hard to make sense of a lot of this stuff, right? And the game is not really committed to telling you anything. Like if I just pick somebody off the street and I said, "Can you explain to me what the difference is between a miracle, a sorcery, and pyromancy?" I don't think I'd get any coherent answers.
Yeah, they'd
But
be
also-
screaming because you picked them up off the street.
Yeah, we UFO kidnap somebody to, that's what aliens are really doing. They're just trying to find Dark Souls guides.
They don't know about Fextra. No, they do know about Fextra Life and how you shouldn't trust it. But yeah, also, if we're talking about narrative significance, I think that the pyromancies and the miracles have narrative significance in Dark Souls because obviously Gwyn and miracles and Orlando
and the first flame and all of that.
and pyromancy like the Witch of Izalith and so on. But sorceries don't really. Because, like, the sorcerer class, they tell you that you come from a university in, like, a place called Vanheim or something. Or something like that, like the Dragon Academy. But they never explain what that is.
Yeah, it's always stood out to me, because on the one hand, people have always said that the magic systems in Dark Souls are easy modes, right? You have magic because you're not good enough to just beat the boss sword, tentacle, right? I think to some extent maybe that is true. You play magic because you can, in a game where most of the enemies are melee, having a ranged attack is really helpful. But I also think that like FromSoft's commitment to not explaining anything, forcing the player to sort of dig stuff out, means that a lot of people are going to fall by the wayside. However, I want to circle this all the way back because I want to talk about a game that I feel like is the best representation of a magic system in any game that I've ever played. And it's a game with magic in the title. It's called Arcana of Steamworks and Magica Obscured, which is Arcanum. Sorry, I just called it Arcanum because the title is a mouthful.
Yeah, no,
Steamworks
that
and
title
Magica
is a
Obscured.
car
Obscura.
jam. That's a traffic wreck.
Arcanum is fascinating to me because it takes place in a world where a technological revolution is budding into an existing pre-magical order, right? Magic and technology are explicitly in opposition to each other, and like it really integrates this both in a mechanical sense, and it's a CRPG, it's an isometric RPG, right? And it really integrates it in a both mechanical and also a lore sense. Like mechanically, if you kill somebody, like a lot of the times, a staple of a lot of video games is you have to solve a mystery. Like, oh, somebody has died, figure out who did it. And in a lot of games, you'd have to maybe break into somebody's house, find some clues or a diary, and then, do something like that. But in Arcanum, if you have the necromancy spell, you can just raise the dead person and ask them who did it.
I mean, I love it when games give you the option to do that.
No, it's a fascinating thing because, for the most part, you'll use your necromancy spell as a combat buff. But then you're like, wait a minute, I can resurrect corpses. Why can't I resurrect this corpse?
Yeah, let me talk to the victim real quick.
Yeah,
maybe they know what's going on.
If you're a high level, mage. But for me, the thing that really solidified it is magic and technology cancel each other out, right? So the basic logic of this is that technology works on existing principles, right? A steam engine works because of the thermodynamics of converting, water into steam and that energy transfer and so on and so forth. Magic exists explicitly to break those rules. Whatever you're doing with magic, you're just breaking the rules of reality, right? So the two butt up into opposition. So for example, the world is in the middle of an industrial revolution and you can get on trains. But here's the thing. You have to declare, what level of magic you've got. If you're too magical, you have to be sent to the back of the train because if you're too close to the engine, it won't work, right?
Oh, that's
And
cool.
that's unfortunately, we're looking at like an actual example of wizard discrimination, right? You can't have the wizard up in the front of the coach
Okay,
because
but no,
train it.
I don't think that that's fair. Okay, it's discrimination is based on doing something that has no actual foundation. Like it's based on
Well,
like treating someone poorly because of a preconceived, ultimately false notion that you have. Discriminating against wizards because they literally stop your trains from working is not discrimination. That's
well,
you.
it's really
If you
no,
explain
it's
to the wizards like, "Hey, I can't. Like, I know that you maybe want to ride at the front of this train, but unfortunately, if you do, the train's not going anywhere." If you
yeah. I mean,
explain that to them, if they're reasonable people, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. I'll go."
well,
Also,
it's
you can
no,
make the back of the train nice.
no. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, you existing as a wizard in a very technological society is a hostile society to you because people will not allow you around their devices. People will not allow you into certain places. You can, I think, if you have a high enough charisma stat, lie about your magical ability and cause problems to the train anyway. It is an example of like your intersection, of beliefs. But like, yeah, I mean, obviously, Arcana has a lot of other topics. There's like explicit racism. There's eugenics. There's all kinds of things involving various uncivilized races and stuff like that because it's
Wow.
Victorian times. And the game grapples with a lot of this really, really well, I think, in my opinion. But it's just for me that was just such an interesting component because I always assumed that magic would be in opposition to technology, right? Like magic works on like just creating a fireball in your hands violates a lot of laws about what we understand about physics. So if you're doing that, you must be doing something that breaks it. So what if you cast a really big fireball? Would you be able to, and then likewise it goes the other way around, right? Like if you bring a lot of technology, if you spec into making a technology heavy character and you go into the magical areas of the world, your technology is not going to work.
Yeah.
your Gatling gun 3000, is not actually going to work because the mechanisms that do the clockwork don't function in a very heavily magical place. And I think that's a very interesting. I very rarely see games really go to the attention of doing that and like really implementing it at large in the world.
And I think that approaches player agency from a different angle, which is that again, it's very easy to misunderstand player agency as letting you do whatever you want, and I think that it's also a case of like there need to be rules in place that potentially stop you from doing what you want, but also like give you genuine consequences for it, like that explain like, hey, if you go into the tech area as a magic user, you're gonna run into trouble for these reasons. Like explaining all of that gives you this sense of like, well, it's a last ditch.
I have to make a choice.
Yeah, it's making a choice. It's literally giving you agency because you can go there and like make a bunch of enemies and destroy a bunch of stuff. You can't use technology, so choosing magic was a choice. Or you can like go somewhere else and be okay. It's
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that it's a very good magic system that falls into our remits.
Yeah, the thing about agency is not necessarily that you can do whatever you want, right? It's that you have the freedom to try to make choices for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Because a player, like the Stanley Parable is a great example of a game that actually you can't really do.
You can't do anything really, but it gives you the illusion of choice.
No, it gives you a lot of it gives you a lot of choices that you have to ponder yourself, right? And it never judges you necessarily for making any of those choices. Like the game's not going to say, hey, "Listen, a magic build is suboptimal or a tech build is this or whatever," right? You're going to have an experience. If you want to see what it's like to be a mage, put the points into your spells, and genuinely, like your experience of the game will be very different from somebody who knows how to do technology. Because there are areas of the world that you'll just never get to see because if you don't have the teleport spell, you can't get there, right?
I love that. It's
know,
I think a good example of this, to go back to D&D, which has been really our our staple diet for this video, is that the what was the spell? It's either friendship or charm person or something like that. Is that one of the conditions of the spell is that when it ends, because it only lasts for a certain amount of time, when it ends, the creature knows that they've been charmed. So
Yes.
it's meant to be like this is a get out of jail free that you have to make the most of, because the second it's over, you're going to be in hot water again, and potentially in more hot water, because they know that you just like messed with their head.
Yeah, I mean the implications of this are quite significant because in a lot of games you might think of like in Fallout you can take temporary you can drink certain items or eat certain things and give yourself a stat boost, right, to pass a charisma check. You can't necessarily cast a spell on somebody because spells don't exist in that game, but the player at the other end of that, the NPC at the other end doesn't know that they've just passed been the subject of a past skill check, right? But the fact that the character knows, oh, this person actually did something to me, that is a deep and significant betrayal or a deep and significant violation of a boundary.
Yeah, I mean that is literally magic interfacing with the narrative of your world. That is, it's not just a case of like, oh, go and kill those three dudes. It doesn't matter how, and you choose to set them on fire, and it's like, well, you did it. It is literally you used otherworldly powers to influence my decision. And now not only do I know that you have these abilities, but I am angry at you because you chose to use them to alter my brain chemistry. And that's like that's such a intense decision. Like, you can play that so many different ways in a game of D&D. And like to a lesser extent Baldur's Gate, which I think also has quite a good magic system, but I didn't want to bring it up because it feels like cheating, because it's just D&D's magic system mixed with divinities.
It is cheating.
It's D&D mixed with Divinity Original Sin 2, so it's like two good magic systems already.
Callum, the honor mode reward for beating Baldur's Gate 3 is literally golden dice.
That's awesome.
No, it is literally cheating, I think maybe to finally close out, I want to ask you a question that sort of cuts a bit to this. Does a magic system actually have to have you cast spells to be a magic system? Or are we talking like Cyberpunk 2077, right? That game has abilities, it's technology, but, from the perspective of somebody else, like a medieval peasant, shooting out a bolt of lightning from your hand because you have a laser gun in your hand, is that not the same as being able to cast a spell?
To be honest, I was considering saying no, because we were talking about magic in the context of it being this otherworldly thing, of it being this thing that interfaces with the world and the story and the plot as like ultimate power being channeled through a person. And that's why it's so weird that like characters don't react when you can summon lightning, or it's so weird when like this character who can call Bahamut gets put in prison and has to stay there because like they suddenly can't do it because they're not in combat anymore. But I think ultimately, if that's the system you're working with, it is essentially mechanically the same as a magic system. It also needs to have that same sort of relevance, narrative-wise, and needs to give you a level of agency. And it runs into the same tropes, like having a technology system that allows you to hack things or make upgrades to your gun. It's not very fun. If it lets you like genuinely maybe take control of something, I think it's also a lot more difficult because like technology does need to follow certain rules. It's like you said, like technology is about interfacing with the physicality of the world, and it works off of existing principles. So it is a lot more limited in what it can do, whereas magic can kind of do anything that it wants. So you have a lot more options.
There is a law for a reason, right? Like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If I'm in a believable, let's say, cyberpunk dystopia, maybe I can believe that somebody has a concealed firearm in their hand, right? A little tiny gun, because you can make small guns. Maybe you can put one in a hand. But if that person starts levitating and they start levitating other people with glowing blue eyes, I'm starting to think, wait a minute, is this technology?
Yeah,
or
this is a wizard.
Oh no, he's a wizard, right?
Although I do, one of the things I really enjoyed about Cyberpunk 2077 is that hacking because people have optical eyes in that game. Like it's such a prevalent cybernetic enhancement. You can hack people's eyes, which
Yeah, you can mess with their perception.
which is a cool idea. It's unfortunate that the only thing I ever saw it amount to was like basically you make them blind for a bit, where it would have been a lot more. It would have been a lot more interesting if you could like make their perception that they see their allies as you.
I
Like
thought
they start shooting a bunch of people. Also, like if they had included net running, but I feel like net running would have been its own game.
Yeah, for sure. Net running, I think, should be its own game. But I think another use of that ability would be to like, how in spy movies and stuff like that, you spoof a camera, right? You just spoof somebody's eyes.
Wait,
you just give them like a
just for the audience at home and totally not for me. Explain what spoofing the camera is.
So in a lot of spy shows or games or whatever, movies especially, this is a common trope in spy stuff. You'll have somebody who like hacks into the footage of a camera, and they splice in a segment of like the footage that repeats, right? Like a hallway.
Yes.
And then meanwhile,
that would be the equivalent of like invisibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, it'd be different to invisibility, which is what I actually like. You're not invisible, but they can't see you because they are just looking down a hallway and they think, well, the hallway is the same as the hallway I've been looking at. And, maybe the level of alertness of a character, like if they suddenly, snap out of it, they need to be in like a low level alertness because that's basically what a security guard is in, right?
Yeah, and then what would be fantastic for that is if there was like a gang in Cyberpunk that specifically didn't use tech, like they didn't have augments. Which does exist. That's in Cyberpunk lore. So if you had to take missions against them, then you would be at a distinct disadvantage, and that's great.
None of your skills are applicable to people who mistrust technology. Maybe they have like all kinds of other things, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot we can talk about. We didn't even talk about things like Shadowrun, which is what happens when your magic system becomes Cyberpunk, but.
For another day.
For another day.
In the meantime,
so, I think
we've kind of narrowed in on what we think a good magic system is. It needs to give you agency. It needs to be relevant to the narrative or the lore, or at best, it needs to be like important to it. But I think agency is probably the most important out of those.
If I had to distill it down, I think the magic system, for it to be a good magic system, has to have an aha moment. I can do that, right? You need to be doing the stuff, and then you think, can I cast a spell that will do that thing? Can I do what I'm thinking my spells can do? And if your magic system allows you to do that, that I think is a good magic system.
Yeah, if you can experiment, and your experiment
outside of combat.
Yeah, if your experiment goes wrong, that's whatever. But if you can experiment with things and find a new way to do something, that's a good magic system.
That's a great magic system.
That's fantastic. If you can kill all of the NPCs in your game and then talk to a squirrel and progress the plot anyway, that's a good magic system.
Oh, also, a little bit of trivia for you, but it is possible to complete Arcanum by killing every single NPC character the entire game. The game will still.
I'm starting to worry about what the kind of games that we're looking at. If we can just I can make this a desolate world. Cool.
Also, you can kill nobody. You can always get around every problem by complete pacifism, which I think is interesting because you rarely encounter games where you're like 100% pacifism or 100% genocide. That isn't Undertale, I guess.
Yeah,
but I think that brings us to an end.
Yeah. Thank you very much for watching. Please let us know what you think it makes up a good magic system. And if you have any magic systems from games that you love that you want to talk about, mention them in the comments. Or just call us idiots or something. I don't care. Go for it. I challenge you, fool. And thank you very much to our Patreon pledges, Dorian and Discordance, for helping us keep the lights on and keeping the train moving with all of these pesky wizards in the back.
For just $1 a month, you too can get your
subjugate the wizard kind.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for watching. Keep an eye out for other content, and so long.